Hi everybody, we're working on the Gored skirt, which is a skirt that's comprised of panels. Watch the video that's about the Gored skirt and patterns before you start draping. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take measurements so we know what size pieces of fabric to use. Because we're going to be draping 4 individual panels. We've got the center front, we have the side front, we got the side back, and the center back panel. So what you want to do is measure the length and the width of each piece of fabric that you're going to need and write them down. So lengthwise, remember that we need 1 inch at the top. So I'm going to hold that there. And I'm going to come down to the bottom of my dress form, which is about 12 inches. You always need to include a hem. But I think a 12-inch piece of fabric or 13 inches, let's make it 13 for your dress form, would probably be about the right length. And then we need the width of each panel. So my center front panel, I'm going to be measuring from the center front. And remember, when you cut that fabric, it needs to have 1 inch that gets folded under. So I'm going to move this over so that I have 1 inch for the center. And you're measuring not the waist because that's slimmer than the hips. We need to measure the widest part of the dress form. And so my panel is going to go to the princess seam, which right here shows the number 3. Because we want to add flare at the bottom, we need to add a couple of inches of fabric so that we'll be able to come out at an angle and flare the skirt. So if this is 3, we're going to make it 5. So your first panel for the front is going to be 13 by 5. And I can tell you that most likely the panel in the back is going to be the same. Now, if you have the dress form that has a much more prominent seat, it's much more curvy, take that measurement and double check because it's probably wider than what it is in the front. But these little skinny mannequins are pretty much the same. So you need those 2 pieces of fabric that are marked with the 1 inch down the center, 1 for the front and 1 for the back. Then we're going to do our side panels. The side panels, if you measure from the princess seam to your side seam, you can see here that this is 3 inches. But I need 2 inches on each side to give me the additional fabric that I need for draping the flare. So that's going to be 7 inches. So you're going to have 2 pieces of fabric that are 13 by 7. And like I said, don't go with my measurements because I'm just taking measurements of this form. Depending on the size and shape of the dress form that you have, the measurements will probably be different. So that's for the half scale form. I'm going to be draping on the full scale, and this is a size 8. Many of you expressed that you thought it would be easier to see what I'm doing when I'm draping on a full scale form. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to work off of this form, and I have my measurements for those panels. So get your fabric ready, and then I'll show you how you're going to mark the fabric before you start draping. Oh, the other measurement that you need will be from your waist to the hip, and this is about 4 inches. I always like to mark the hip line on my fabric because it's a good indicator of whether I have something horizontally balanced and that my grain line is straight. So go ahead and cut your fabric, and then we will add the marks to our fabric. So when we start marking our fabric, remember your center front and center back are going to have the line down that center at about 1 inch that you're going to fold under so that you're working with the fold along the center front and center back and not a raw piece of fabric. It's really important that you follow this step because later on, if you were to pull a fabric out that you draped and it's all raggedy in the front, how do you know exactly where you were going to place measurements on that fabric? So I'm going to take the measurement that's from my waist to my hip, and I'm going to draw that horizontal line. On my full scale mannequin, that was at 8 inches. Take your measurement from your half scale. So the 8 inches is the 1 inch I need for a seam allowance, seam allowance at the top. You can add a little line right there across the top for that 1 inch. You do not want to come straight across. We're not marking a straight squared off waistline. We're just marking the spot where I'm going to start draping. And then I'm going to come down. My dress form over there was 7 inches. So that's where my hip line is going to be. And I like to have this line so that I can keep a horizontal line in my sight when I'm looking at how the fabric is draping. Now you take the measurement that you took that was the width from your center front to the side seam and then adding a couple of inches for the drape. That's the overall size of your pattern or piece of fabric. So what was your actual dimension on your dress form? On the half scale, it was 2 inches. I'm working in full scale, so I'm going to come across 4 inches, and I'm going to draw a vertical line because this is where we're going to drape and attach it at the hip. So I'm going to go all the way down the fabric with that line. And this is going to help us in squaring it up and draping it so that it's on grain, but we'll be adding flare over here, so you'll see later that you'll get a diagonal line. So your front and your back are very much similar. Your side front and side back, you want to take your piece of fabric and you want to split it down the middle with a straight line. So I'm going to take my fabric, I'm going to mark that center, just right there, and I'm going to draw a straight line down the center of my fabric. And I'm also going to draw that hip line. So here was the waist, and then here was the hip, right there. So both your side front and side back, you'll be drawing these particular lines, and this is just to help you balance the fabric when you start draping. You're going to draw 2 lines that are the actual width of your panel at the hip. My full scale mannequin is 5 inches at the hip from the princess line to the side seam. So I'm going to split that in half. And it's 2.5 inches in both directions. So I'm marking that, and I'm going to draw that line on the panel. I'm using a see-through ruler because I have a horizontal line that I can lay on here and know that I'm not going off at an angle, that I am keeping this perfectly square. It's a good idea to mark the panels as to what they are. So this is my side front panel. I'm just going to write it on the fabric. And the same with the rest of the panels so that you don't at any point switch them and wind up with a skirt later on that doesn't seem to fit right. So prep all your fabric and then we'll start draping.